This lesson is about growth in plants, and here are the objectives. Now, taking a look at a plant, we can divide it into two systems. The shoot system, which is above ground and consists of the stem, the leaves, and if there are any flowers, and the root system, which is underground. And plant growth is indeterminate. That means that the growth of the plant continues throughout its life, and that's in contrast to determinate growth, like in most animals, where the animal stops growing at a certain point in their life. We can also talk about primary growth and secondary growth. Primary growth refers to growth in length. So if the stem or the leaves or the roots are getting longer, that's primary growth and happens in all plants. Some, but not all plants, also exhibit secondary growth, which is growth in width or growth in thickness. So when a tree is adding width onto its trunk, that's called secondary growth. And again, that doesn't happen in all plants. Growth in plants happens as a result of the functioning of meristems. Meristems are undifferentiated tissue regions that contain stem cells. Remember that stem cells are undifferentiated cells that can give rise to multiple different kinds of cells. Now, there are different kinds of meristems depending on whether we're talking about primary or secondary growth. The adjective apical comes from the noun apex, meaning the end or the tip. And at the end of a shoot or a root, there's a meristem. So at the end of a shoot, we have a shoot apical meristem. And when division happens in the stem cells there, that leads to lengthening of the shoot. And there's also a root apical meristem at the end of growing roots. And again, division at the root apical meristem contributes to lengthening of that root. So primary growth happens at apical meristems in the shoot and in the root. Whereas secondary growth happens in lateral meristems. So there are two types of lateral meristems that extend throughout the stem. One is called the vascular cambium and gives rise to new or secondary xylem and phloem, and one is called the cork cambium and exists at the outside of the stem and gives rise to cork, which is part of the bark of a tree. To understand better how secondary growth happens and how lateral meristems are organized, let's take a look at a cross-section of a stem. So here I've got two cross-sections of stems. One's a eudicot stem and one's a monocot stem. Eudicots and monocots are two important divisions of angiosperms, or flowering plants. And the part cot refers to cotyledons. Cotyledons are seed leaves, or leaves that are present in the seed before germination, whose job is to store or absorb nutrients in the seeds, depending on the kind of seed it is. And they can also become photosynthetic after germination as well, like other leaves. But the presence of two cotyledons, a dicot, or one cotyledon, a monocot, is an important distinction in a way of dividing plants. Many other characteristics of the plants divide along those two because they form groups within the plant family. The prefix "u" means true because there are some plants with two cotyledons that are not actually true dicots. So these are two groups into which angiosperms or flowering plants can be divided. Eudicots can grow with primary growth and secondary growth. In other words, they can get wider, whereas monocots in general don't exhibit secondary growth. So they don't have these two types of lateral meristems. They don't have vascular cambium, they don't have cork cambium. Now, in a eudicot, the cambium, this lateral meristem, exists in a ring in the stem. So if we were to look in 3 dimensions, this would actually be a cylinder, but here this is a cross-section, so I'm looking at a cross-section or a ring, and this is the vascular cambium. Now, again, it's a meristem, and division of the vascular cambium is going to result in more vascular tissue, more xylem and more phloem. The xylem is on the inside of the vascular cambium, and often in cross-section looks a little bit larger like that, and the phloem is on the other side. So in green here, this is the phloem, and phloem again is on the outside of the vascular cambium, whereas the xylem is on the inside towards the middle of the plant. Division of this vascular cambium is going to produce more phloem to the outside and more xylem to the inside. So we'll see division like this and like this. Now, the phloem actually forms part of the inside of the bark of the plant and will eventually be sloughed off. But the xylem will build up, and this is the wood of a woody tree. And there will also be some fibrous tissue here as well. Now, altogether, this forms a vascular bundle, and these vascular bundles will exist in a ring around the stem of a eudicot, something like this. Here I'm showing the xylem on the inside and the phloem on the outside, as well as a little fibrous cap. Now in contrast, monocots don't exhibit secondary growth and they don't have vascular cambium. Instead, their vascular bundles are arranged on the outside and then scattered throughout. So each of these is a vascular bundle containing xylem and phloem scattered throughout the stem. And if you were to zoom in on one of those, then you see what sometimes gets described as a monkey face. It kind of looks like a face of xylem with a forehead of phloem in each of these bundles that I've drawn on the right here in black. But the key point is that they're not arranged in a ring like they are in monocots. They're scattered throughout, and there's no vascular cambium because there's no secondary growth in monocots. They don't get thicker. The stems don't get thicker like those of dicots do. So that's a quick look at growth in plants.